It has nothing to do with a rapture. There is no such thing as the rapture in the whole of the Bible. When we look at the Apostle Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, in the first epistle, chapter 2, he says how he had suffered many things and was treated very badly in Philippi. And later on, he tells us who they were. He says in verse 14, You have become followers of the churches of God in Judea, because you are suffering the same things from your countrymen, the Thessalonians, as the Judeans have suffered from the Jews, who killed the Lord Jesus. The Jews killed the Lord Jesus. Don't listen to anybody who says the Romans did it. In effect, the Jews killed the Lord Jesus. They killed the prophets. They have persecuted us and are adversaries to all men. They prohibit us to speak to the Gentiles that they may be saved. And this is what Paul says, to fill up their sins always, for the wrath of God is come upon them to the end. It's the wrong translation in King James. Now, Jesus mentioned that their generation was filling up the cup of the wrath of God because they had killed the prophets. This is what Paul says about the Jews. And it says, the wrath of God is coming upon them. He wrote in about 52 AD, to the end. There would be an end to the wrath of God. The actual translation of the Greek is that they would suffer a complete wrath of God and disappear, which of course is what happened to them. When we look at the book of 1 Thessalonians, chapter 5, Paul speaks about the wrath of God and tells the Christians they are not would not experience the wrath of God. They living then would not experience the wrath of God because it was coming on the Jews. Has nothing to do with end times, as people think it is. In Luke chapter 17, verse 26, Jesus speaks about the days of Noah and likens them to the coming of the Son of Man. And he says it will be just as bad or worse than it was in the days of Lot and Sodom, when fire and sulphur came from heaven. Then he says, those who are in the housetop must not go back to get his goods, he must flee. Then he says in the last verse, they said to him, where, Lord? Because one will be taken and another left. People use that verse for the second coming, and it is wrong to use it so. It has nothing to do with a rapture. There is no such thing as the rapture in the whole of the Bible. The idea of the rapture came from a crypto, like Honza, maybe in the 1700s AD, a Jesuit, who introduced the teaching of the rapture. It's not in the New Testament. The rapture teaching is you go back to heaven for 7 years and you come down again for 1,000 years. There's no such thing in the Bible. You find the verse. There is none. But Jesus said in the last verse of that chapter, this is where the dead body is, there also the vultures will gather. That's spoken about in Matthew 24, Luke 21 and Mark 13. The vultures were the Romans, gathering around the dead body of the nation and people of Israel, around their city, around their land, around their temple. That's what Jesus was speaking about. So if you have been taught it's about the rapture, it is totally wrong, as you can see, if you look at the scriptures that we have pointed out. So in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul is talking about the day of the Lord that's coming, because he knew it was the Jews who were opposing. He knew all about the doctrines of Jesus, of Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13. Jesus had taught him. Paul knew what an enemy the Jews were to the people of God in those days. Of course, there are no Jews today to be our enemy. Those Jews were the descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. There's none around today. They're not our enemy. So I'm not speaking about in a way that's against Semites. Any Semite that is around, as confirmed by scholars from Israel, there are some Palestinians, descendants through Esau. In Acts chapter 17, while he was in Thessalonica, he was opposed by the Jews. He went to Berea, was opposed by them. Went to Corinth, was opposed by them. It's in the book of Acts. I'm not telling you something I have dreamed out. It's there for you to read. So in 1 Thessalonians 2, 14 to 16, he speaks about them as being unreasonable and wicked men. Now, if you want to know about the Jewish wars of Josephus, which Jesus prophesied in a small way regarding the wrath that was to come on Israel at the end, can be found in Matthew 24, verse 31, where the angels will gather the elect and gather them away from the wrath that will come. Well, they were there, gathered, those who were elect. The elect Christians, supposedly, among the Jews of Palestine at that time, did two things. They either renounced Jesus Christ or they continued believing in him. Those who renounced Jesus Christ never did escape from Jerusalem. They were killed. And there were others also who killed themselves. There were others who were killed by their fellow Jews. But there were some who were gathered out of that place of destruction by the angels, if you like. They had angelic visitations. They had supernatural words spoken to these believers in Jerusalem. And they were taken out of the city by their willing departure on 2 occasions, and they escaped the wrath of God. Paul knew what an enemy the Jews were to the people of God in those days. Of course, there are no Jews today to be our enemy.